Hi, I'm Ted Wolfe, presented by Guidewise. Welcome to the Implementors podcast, where we connect you to the stories and insights of people who have mastered implementation. Why? Because ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. Join us as we uncover the secrets of successful implementation so you can conquer your implementation struggles. Welcome to the Implementors podcast presented by Guidewise, where we focus on the topic of implementation because ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. Today, we're honored to host a business icon whose frameworks have shaped how entire industries navigate growth and innovation, Geoffrey Moore. You know Geoffrey is the author of Crossing the Chasm, the definitive guide, in my opinion, of scaling innovations beyond early adopters into mainstream markets. In his most recent LinkedIn article, AI, Trapped Value, Zone Management, and the Efficient Frontier of Risk, Geoffrey outlines a pragmatic, deeply strategic lens for business leaders trying to make sense of AI. He calls for leaders to rethink risk, not just in terms of what they do, but what they fail to do. Welcome, Geoffrey.
Well, it's nice to be here. Thanks, Ted.
Geoffrey, I've read your book, Crossing the Chasm, when I was just starting out in business. It's an eye-opener. And one of the things that became very evident to me was crossing that chasm. There's a strategy involved, and it's extremely difficult. A lot of our viewers are looking at implementation. And if they can't cross that chasm, that means they can't implement. What are some of your observations and recommendations in this world of AI to do that?
Yeah, I think any disruptive innovation, it's AI right now, but you and I remember when it was mobile or when it was cloud or when it was the internet or whatever. So we have this technology adoption lifecycle model, and there's kind of 4 stages to it. And the first stage we call the early market, and it's got visionaries and technology enthusiasts, and they're people who believe what you believe. They buy into your narratives. They even sometimes finish your sentences. They'll lean in to help the thing work. And you can get that early start with them. And it's very important to get an early start with them and to kind of show what the possibilities are with your disruptive innovation. So if you're doing something with AI, the first group you'd want to work with is somebody who's enthusiastic with you. Now, that's not going to scale. Okay. That's the early market. The chasm is the thing that separates that group from everybody else. And everybody else is going, look, this stuff comes around all the time. So we got to be careful here. Let's wait and see. Let's see let other people go first. We'll check them out. And if it's good, we're going to use it, but we don't want to be the pioneers. And so how do you get that group to start? We sometimes call it the junior high dance problem. Like, how do you get them out onto the dance floor? And what we learned about that is that there's always a subset of people who they don't believe what you believe, but they need what you have. In other words, they have a problem and they can't solve it with their current solutions. And they're under increasing pressure to solve it, maybe just for their own organization, or maybe their entire enterprise is being held back by this one bottleneck. So the idea of crossing the chasm is target there. And the game is you want to solve that problem end to end. So you can't give 80% of the solution. You can bring partners to the table, but you got to bring what we call the whole product that fulfills the compelling reason to buy for this target customer. And the second thing you want to do is you want to talk to people who talk to each other, because pragmatists ultimately rely on each other for references. So you can't get one dentist and one plumber, and one neurosurgeon and one NASA scientist. You want either 4 plumbers, 4 dentists, 4 because they're going to talk to each other. And so that combination of whole product, a community, a marketing community that talks to each other, that's what we call the beachhead market segment. Once you win them, then you can spread out from there. It's like kindling. That helps light the fire. But until you win your first one, you're kind of stuck in the chasm.
So when you look at something like AI today, people are saying, I don't know how to implement it. How do I even find somebody that I'm going to say is enthusiastic, but they're trustworthy? They know what they're talking about.
Well, you actually sound like a pragmatist who doesn't want to do that, really. And maybe many of your audience are pragmatists. So if you're a pragmatist, you are going to wait. I mean, the early adopters are people who are kind of chomping at the bit. And when you have one, that's great. But if you don't, then fast following is the strategy. But if you look at AI right now, let me give a little context, because I think AI has now gotten to the point where everything in its mother is AI, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there are 3 kinds of AI that people need to be aware of on this podcast. Well, I'll call them predictive AI, generative AI, and agentic AI. So three kind of technical terms. But predictive AI, that's been around as long as you and I have been in the industry. We were doing predictive AI in the 80s and 90s with advanced manufacturing planning, with quality control systems, monitoring, staying within control. That's predictive AI. And basically, you can now do preventative maintenance. And we've been doing preventative maintenance for 20 years. So it's not like AI's never been here. But the two new ones are called generative and agentic. Generative AI came out of nowhere on I think it was Christmas of 2022. I can't remember when it was. But all of a sudden, you could effectively talk to or text with a program that appeared to really understand everything you asked and gave very, very cogent responses to it. And so that generative AI is essentially a way of putting a large language module on top of a trove of information. I mean, they trained it by getting everything they could get off the internet and everywhere else. So it's an amazingly complete capability. What it does is it gives you the wisdom of crowds. Basically, having surveyed all the possible answers, it gives you the best approximation of what the most reasonable person would assume, having digested all that information. So that's really valuable in situations where you're trying to share information with a customer, frequently asked customers, that kind of stuff. Much better than a chatbot. Chatbot gives you very mechanical answers. This is much more nuanced. So that's very exciting. It isn't as game-changing in terms of economics as you might think. There's not a ton of trap value. It just makes things a lot better. And the ability to keep institutional knowledge, if you're passing the baton from one generation to the next in your family business, having a generation AI to be able to go after all the information you've collected over all the years, wonderful. But the one that's really game-changing, the one that's now getting all the attention this year, and all the policymakers and the regulatory agencies are worried about, is agentic AI. And agentic AI takes responsibility for acting. So in addition to understanding and probably using some generative AI to understand and make sure that they're on the right track, agentic AI will say, I am going to actually solve the request. I'm going to address it, or I'm going to proactively intervene in the operation of this factory without being asked to, because I can see that certain limits need to be maintained. Kind of like a thermostat. I mean, thermostat's like a tiny, tiny example of an agent. But this, of course, is much more complicated.
Mm-hmm. So when you look at the pace of how AI is transforming itself and many organizations, when you look at the agentic, how long do you think it'll take for the early adopters? And my heart is an early adopter, but my head is a little bit more pragmatic. Okay.
That's what the gray in your hair temples is for, right?
Exactly. Right. Exactly. Battle scars and medals at the same time. How long do you think it'll take for this transformation to actually get a foothold and become a little bit more of the norm, moving beyond the early adopters?
It's really interesting right now. So right now it's still in the early adopter phase. And I do a bunch of work with Salesforce. And Salesforce is an interesting case in point, and Microsoft is another interesting case in point. So Microsoft and Anthropic and Meta and Google, they all have these very, very powerful large language modules. But they're all generic. They're kind of horizontal. They would go across any industry, across any profession. Salesforce, and potentially any other enterprise application person, has a set of business processes already that their customers have been using for 25 years. So if you put an agent into that environment and say, essentially, I'm going to ask the agent to act like your customer service rep or your business development rep or your technical support rep, that's easier to adopt because the guardrails are built in. In other words, you're only really working with the data that was always available to you. And I think guardrails is the anxiety right now. The power of AI agentic AI is amazing, but the guardrails are daunting. I mean, if you just, and it's one of those things where it's not probable that something bad would happen, but it's conceivable that something catastrophic could happen. And so I think in that situation, that is a very tough bar to clear. And it ultimately may just get pushed and pushed, but never actually really cleared. But finding these pools of action where you could say, look, with this kind of information under these controlled conditions, we can do this. And I think the intermediate step, they call it human in the loop. Let the agent take the first crack at it and then review it before you release it. People in wealth management are doing that for sure, because they don't want to have an agent. They don't be liable for an agent that gives bad advice.
Mhm. So that's why my heart, although it's an early adopter, my brain says I can only be wrong so many times and I'm out of the game. So I'm going to go back then and I'm going to say, where do I start? And let's talk a little bit, if we can, about your recent paper. You talked about trap value analysis.
Yeah.
Explain what you mean by that.
So trap value analysis is that was Ray just came home. Good. So trap value analysis is where is the in your current business operating model, where are you bottlenecked? Where are you being held back? As opposed to, I have AI, it's magical. Where should I try it out? So instead of going from the technology out into the world, you go from the world and back into the technology. And so finding where the trap value is, in some cases, it may be, classic ones you and I in our history, abandoned shopping carts, obviously a source of trap value, right? You have a situation where preventative maintenance and a plant goes down, and all of a sudden you've got a plant out for 8 hours, huge amount of trap value. So there are places, and the call centers, or how about just being on hold with an IVR machine? Press 3 for another 45 minutes of my music. I mean, so there's all this trap value, and so the idea behind that is, where's the trap value in your world, and is it worth going after? Either because the size of the prize is great, or because it's holding you back in a way that's going to really punish your business going forward. That's the trap value idea.
So interested to see what your thoughts are on this with trapped value. Many people will go in and they'll look for the congestion in the process flow, the efficiency. Businesses are very much an ecosystem. You do one thing over here, it affects 5 things over here. So you need some systemic type of thinking about and reasoning about the organization. But what about emotional intelligence? Untrapped value, or trapped value, I should say. The people side of the equation. AI might design a great strategy, but it won't implement that strategy, at least not today. And it's people's resistance to that change. How much trapped value do you think there are in the people side of the entire equation?
Well, that actually, I mean, that's another way of describing the chasm. I mean, basically, the way that adoption works socially and with EQ and with people is basically the rule of thumb is, I'll do it when I see other people like me doing it, and probably not before. So that notion of saying, how do you build a coalition of the willing? And how do you build from a small coalition? Like, if you wanted to be president, and I have no idea why you would want to do that, but if you did, your first job would be to try to win one primary in one state, right? The New Hampshire primary or the Iowa caucus or whatever it's going to be next time, because you need to start the coalition, and then you would build the coalition going forward, because it's what's happening. And I don't know how long this has been true, but certainly in this decade for sure, the pace of innovation is far faster than the pace of adoption, which means adoption is the long pole in the tent, not technology. And so solving for the adoption problem is great. And my basic rule for that is, people will solve a problem before they will pursue an ambition. So the basic rule of Crossing the Chasm is problems first, not ambitious goals. Visionaries in early market have ambitious goals, but pragmatists aren't going to do it until they say, well, when it turns out when the risk of adopting is lower than the risk of not adopting.
Right.
If you've got a problem that's getting worse and worse and worse, it's like if you have a medical condition, at some point you're going to say, I'll participate in that clinical trial. It's like, I got nothing to lose here, people. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what you're looking for.
We were at an AI symposium at a college, and they started the AI symposium in the college. And I was shocked by the number of students who were, I'm going to say, mistrustful of AI. How do you respond to that? Because it's somewhere the crash is going to happen between the fear and you just got to do it.
Well, I mean, it's just like anything else. Some of their friends will start doing it, and then they'll realize, okay, they didn't, first of all, they didn't get kicked out of school, or they didn't go to jail, or they didn't lose their minds. There's a wonderful billboard that Guinness Stout, the beer, the Guinness Stout, right? They had a billboard, I think it was back in the 60s. And the billboard said, I know I don't like it because I've never tried it. And that's a little bit of what you're trying to overcome them, right? I know I don't like it because I've never tried it. And by the way, it can be intimidating. You start talking with, if you're trying to match wits with Chat GPT or, whatever large language module you're using, I mean, it's better than you. So I think that there's ego issues. I think there's anxieties or whatever. From my point of view, I've just found it to be a really good co-pilot. I mean, I've really said, look, anytime I have any question, my first thought is, let me just ask. And if I don't like their answer, I won't do it. I don't like the idea when they ask, can I write your letter for you? The answer is no, I'm an author, please. I like to write myself. but I can see why other people are going, what, another letter? Oh yeah, please write that one for me. And so there's a lot of stuff it can do.
So let me take this, if I can, just a little on the personal side. The arc of your career and your writing and the topics that you're writing on today, I couldn't have predicted when you wrote Crossing the Chasm myself. What is it that led you to the infinite staircase and different types of thoughts? What's the arc that brought that out of you?
It's funny. So there's 7 business books, and Infinite Staircase is the 8th book, which is a philosophy book, not a business book. Mm-hmm. But I actually started my career. I have a PhD in medieval and Renaissance English literature, which is a natural fit for the tech sector, as you can imagine. Mm-hmm. But after being a professor in a small college in Michigan for 4 years, Olivet College, we decided we needed to move back to California. There were no jobs in academics, so I joined a software company and I began my second career. But both careers always had this idea of conceptual models or frameworks or understanding something that way. And so all the business books were essentially looking at a problem that looked to me. I mean, every one of the books sort of started with, that's an interesting problem. I'm not sure I know how to solve that problem. How would you solve that problem? And then that would lead to a book. And so there were 7 of those. The last one, Zone to Win for Business, is, I think, it and Crossing the Chasm are the 2 that I think matter the most. But then also, I still had this English major, PhD in literature, philosophy, strategy for living thing going on the back of my head. And, we have grandchildren now, and I'm thinking, well, maybe I should just write some of that down. And it started just as almost like a personal project. And then I wrote a little bit more, and then I wrote a little bit more. And so then I ended up saying, well, I guess it's a book. And it's probably, by no question, my least best-selling book, but it's a book. And what's been fun is because I'm doing a blog on LinkedIn. Half of my blogs are about the business, but the other half are about the philosophy. And there is a growing goal. It's like Crossing the Chasm, or maybe it's still early market. Might still be philosophy enthusiasts. But anyway, we're having some fun, and so that's how the 2 fit together.
I actually think that they are very telling in forecasting the future. And here's why I say that. In business, you have to make right decisions. You can only be wrong so many times and you're out of the game. But philosophy and AI now are bringing, I believe, a new pressure point to being successful in business. And that is the ethics and the morality and the personal development, if you will, of yourself. Because to work in a world of AI where it takes over the IQ and makes us all almost equal in many respects, I now have to focus on developing myself, my collaborative skills with people. So I actually think those 2 worlds are coming together and will be a strong force together in leading people in this new introduction of AI.
I think that's true.
How does that impress you?
What's
the impact? What do you think?
I think, first of all, I think it's true. And I think that people worry about, well, if AI is smarter than me, why does the world need me? Maybe it just needs AI, and maybe I'm an irrelevant thing. My experience of the world, and I suspect yours as well, is I've never seen the world run out of problems. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, it doesn't fit. You look around today, and you just think, are there any problems in the world today? Well, there might be 1 or 2. I mean, good God. And so I think the object is just moving the efficient frontier of how can I intervene to be of service to my family, my friends, my community. Look, with AI, you can intervene at a much deeper, more impactful way than without AI. We know that's going to be true. We don't know how to do it quite yet. So there's all this anxiety we're talking about. But it's obvious at some point, we've assimilated every other technology. We're going to assimilate technology as well. But then I think what you want to remember is you still need mission. At your point, you should call it EQ, and I would also talk about mission. You need to have a sense of mission that says, look, what's the point of my company? I mean, other than the fact that I need to make a living, God bless, we all do. But I mean, why should anybody care about my company? Where are we? And then then you ask yourself the question, I give value to my customers. Good for you. But couldn't you give more value to your customers? Well, I don't know. I'm working as hard as I can. I'm working 60 hours a week. What do you mean? And the idea is, well, what if you had, a co-pilot that did 40 of those 60 hours of work for you? Would you just would you go to the gym, or would you go to the golf course, or would you try to find some way to take it to the next level with your customers? And I'm hopeful the last answer is at least part of the response.
So here's what happened to me, an experience that I had. I read Zone to Win quite some time ago. I reread it again in preparation for our conversation today. And now I'm fascinated myself with the AI and the people side of business now and the unlocked value. So as I'm reading it and I start looking at the different zones, I'm looking at them differently, and that I used to look at the business performance zone. Now I'm looking at that, but also, what about my own performance as a person? How am I showing up? The same thing with productivity. How productive am I? Incubation, transformation zone. They're all coming together, it seems, in this new focal point. How does that impact you?
Sure. Well, in fact, it's yes. I think that's exactly what it's supposed to do. So the Zone to Win model, for those people on the podcast haven't seen the book, it just says, look, how can an established business, many people listening to this have established businesses, how can you run your core business, the one that you've been running for a long time, and succeed with it and make money with it and fund the company and serve your customers? At the same time, incorporate a disruptive innovation. And Ted's talking about doing that personally. You can do that personally. You can do it as a company. You can do it as a church. You can do it as a sports team. You can do it as any group of people can do this. And the zone model just says, look, when you parse that problem of how do I do both the traditional and the disruptive, you want to think about zones because there are different operating models for each of those things. So what we call the performance zone is where you deliver your current business and your current year, and you're evaluated heavily financially, as well as by your customer success and customer net promoter value, that kind of stuff. That's all the performance zone. And the productivity zone is all the things you do behind the scenes to let you do the performance zone at scale and with success and with profitability. So finance and HR and IT and that kind of stuff, that's all in the productivity zone. Okay. And then the incubation zone is where you hive off this new thing, which you're not sure about. You don't want to expose it to the performance zone because you're not really sure it's ready for the customers. Or if it is, it's maybe only ready for early adopter customers. But most of your performance zone customers are not early adopters. They've been with you for a while. And you don't want to put it in the productivity zone, because in the productivity zone, we'll study it to death and we'll regulate it to death. And this is what's the problem with public legislations passing law about artificial intelligence right now. They're just trying to avoid risk at any cost. And so they're not going to learn anything. That doesn't work. The incubation zone is where you live and learn and you go out into the world with it, but you go out with a kind of a sign on your head that says, this is an experiment, people. You are a guinea pig. So if you want to be a guinea pig, if you believe what we believe, we want to work with you. But don't think this is like my regular guarantee, I make no mistake kind of part of the world. And those three zones, I think, as you could kind of sense, have very different cultures, very different operating models, very different success metrics. And so it's not that they don't interoperate. It's not that they're not collaborating with each other, but they get in each other's way if you try to blend them. So you really do need to have everybody understand, what zone am I playing in? What key performance indicators communicate success in that zone? Where are we? So that's not. And then the fourth zone, the transformation zone, is when you go, wow, I have to change. We have to change. We're going to change our operating model. We're going to change our business model. We're going to do something pretty darn dramatic. And by the way, it's going to kind of make everybody else in every other zone pretty darn nervous, because we're putting a lot of stuff on the table. So the transformation zone is the fourth zone. And the key idea there is, if you're going to do this, you have to make it your number one priority, and you've got to get through the transformation. And frankly, nothing else really matters until you have, because you're actually potentially putting your entire company or at risk. So those are the four zones. And you could do it at a company level. But as Ted was just saying, you'd say, well, look at me. What's my performance zone as an individual?
Yep.
Who are my customers? And my spouse, my children, my family, or my clients, whoever it is. Then am I being productive? What am I doing about my own productivity? How could I
And what
improve my
about
own?
meaning in my life?
Well, and the meaning in life, that one is transcendental a little bit in that I don't know. I think it's a good question. Where does meaning go and which zone does I guess what happens is if you're kind of in your own skin and kind of happy with the trajectory you're on, I think most of the meaning would be in the performance zone supported by the productivity zone. But if all of a sudden, like you hear people in the middle of their lives, convert or have some amazing spiritual experience or tragic experience or emotional experience or whatever, and they do change. And then that I think would be more like the transformation zone. But I think transformation is the exception rather than the rule. I think most people, most of the time, are not doing that.
So when I was in college, I have a finance degree, but I am 6 credits shy of a bachelor's degree in philosophy. So as I'm reading Zone to Win again, and I'm looking at the 4 zones, and all of a sudden I'm impressed with personal people side of each one, as you just explained. I believe true meaning comes out when all 4 zones are working in harmony.
Oh, that's nice. I think that's probably right. Or yeah. And with or without the transformation, I do think the transformation is a kind of a break glass if necessary zone.
Yeah.
But the other 3 zones, for sure, I totally agree.
Yeah. Transformation zone to me is like, okay, I've crossed the Rubicon. The ships are already burnt. I'm not going back.
You can't go back. You can't go back.
So when you go and you look at the zones, whether from a business, examining your business and its operations and its effectiveness, or yourself, there's risk involved. You talk in this article about the efficient frontier of risk by zone. Talk to us a little bit about that.
This is, I think, I mean, by the way, this is one of the longest LinkedIn blog posts I've ever done. I think it was like 6 pages. So it's like, oh my God. But anyway, I was really trying to get into it. So the idea, the efficient frontier of risk is simply what's the optimum amount of risk to take? And if you take too much risk, obviously that's not good. If you take too little risk, so the efficient frontier, and I realized each zone has a different efficient frontier of risk. And so if you think about the performance zone, the goal of the performance zone is to be as impactful and as effective with your customers as you possibly can be. So the deal with that is, and one of the dangers in the performance zone is if you make a plan that's like pretty solid and frankly, you don't think you're going to miss your plan. It's not particularly ambitious, but you're going to make your plan. We sometimes call it sandbagging, in the business world. The problem there is you're not taking enough risk. It's not that you're going to get fired because you're going to make your plan. Great. But I can remember working with the HP group one couple of years in a row on the printer side. This is way back in the day when they crushed their plan and lost market share. And the executives looked at themselves and said, this cannot be right. This cannot be right. And so it's important that you push the efficient frontier and take. So the thing about taking risks in the performance zone is look at this at the return from the customer side, not from your own business bankroll side. Where's the efficient frontier for us to be as powerful as we can be in the world in service to whatever our mission is? So that's performance risk. Productivity zone is the most risk-averse place on the planet, right? They're designed to keep you out of jail, pay taxes, get the payroll, run the systems, keep the Wi-Fi running, whatever the heck it is. And every one of those, if it goes down, everybody goes, well, what the hell did you do? But if it stays up, well, duh, yeah, what's the point? So it's what we call mission critical risk. There's no prize for doing it well, but there's a huge penalty for doing it bad. So that's why it's risk averse, and it's designed to be risk averse. But there comes a time when you say, yeah, but now our risk mitigation procedures have become so burdensome. And we've never taken any of them offline. We've never re-engineered them. So every time we add a new procedure, it just goes on top of all the other procedures. You get to a point where you feel like Gulliver. Gulliver's Travels. He's tied down by all the Lilliputians. And no little rope is that strong, but there's like thousands of ropes and he can't move. And so I think there comes a time, and you said you were at IBM earlier in your career. Well, I think what Irving's trying to do is to free IBM from a bunch of pull of the past, Lilliputian stuff.
Mhm.
So I think there's a time when you got to do that. And so taking risk in the productivity zone, I think is around. And what I would do is people tend to measure risk reengineering or any reengineering, process reengineering in terms of dollars saved. But that's not the problem. The problem is time saved. And it's not time like people cost time. It's time between when you want to act and when you did act. And in much of life, if you miss the window, there's often a very small window. EQ would be a great example. How long do you have to apologize to your wife after you did whatever you did? Okay, there's a window of opportunity here, people, and you don't
There's
like
a cost of opportunity also.
yeah, that's true. And same thing with the children. What's the way? So the point with the idea that is when you're doing your process reengineering, look at latency. Are we just slow to act? Are we not getting? Are we giving up a lot of our power because we're not timely enough in our response? Okay. Now the incubation zone's other end of the spectrum. The incubation zone's like, no. We're going to put a lot of fences around you so you can take quite a lot of risk, and we can even call it fast failure. And in fact, fast failure became a sort of a mantra term in Silicon Valley. And after a while, people go, oh, well, fast failure is the answer to everything. And the answer is no. Fast failure in the performance zone, you'll get fired. Fast failure in the productivity zone, you might have to go to jail. So it's like, this is not a good idea. But in the incubation zone, it is. And so I think the key thing there is, and this is hard for a bunch of kids, it's hard for young people to understand, but the older you are, the easier it is to understand. If you have an established enterprise, it's not your job to invent the future. It's your job to assimilate the future so that it doesn't obsolete you. So the incubation zone in an established enterprise should be focused on what we call playing defense, not playing offense. You should not be funding some amazing research project. You should be saying, of all the amazing research projects that are coming to my doorstep, which of any of these is going to affect my industry, my customers, and me? And shouldn't I get a better understanding of that? And by the way, maybe that includes incorporating it into some way that I'm doing business today to understand how it would interact with my customers and my business processes and my suppliers and whatever. All of that's for the incubation zone. And the purpose of the incubation zone is to figure out, is this something that I need to incorporate and take seriously and commit to? Or is this something that's nice to have, but maybe not on my watch? Mm-hmm. And if it is important, then the last one's the transformation zone. If you really decide, like, for example, if you're a taxi cab company and Uber's in your city, I'm sorry, I mean, that's like an existential threat. You can't ignore it. Okay. And so you say, what am I going to do about that? Well, now that's a transformational problem because you have a system where you have medallions and you have salaried employees and you have regulatory regimes and a public utilities commission. And how in the world are you going to deal with that problem? But you're going to have to do something. And so whatever that transformational initiative is, you want to do it as fast as you want to get through what we call the tipping point. Malcolm Gladwell called it the tipping point, and I steal Malcolm's ideas routinely. But the idea there is to get through the transition so that you can play the game on the new rules. Right now, for example, our automobile industry is trying to deal with not just with electric vehicles, which is one whole set of problems, but the dealership model, which by the way is a second set of issues, and then the servicing the stream of revenue, which is completely different for an EV than it is for a combustion engine. And you put all that together, and GM and Ford and Stellantis and all these, they have to go through a remarkable transformation with their ecosystems. And that's hard. It's hard.
Mm-hmm. So if we look at business as an art, it's not a science, it's an art. How well can I become an artisan, if you will, and make these systems work and manage my risk and look down the road? If I take a look at that and I look back at the Middle Ages, if you will, from what I remember and understand, but I'm not the expert that you are.
You weren't alive in the Middle Ages, though, were you? Okay.
Not sure. but part of becoming an artist in your craft was a sense of pride because you worked hard and you sacrificed to make that happen. But also there was a gratification that came in with others respecting your art. Today, I'm not sure we have a lot of that in business. I'm not sure a lot of people look at business generally speaking, other than we're here to make a profit and everything else is transcendental. It's just there when we need it and it's gone. And that's the value of what is going on. Looking at the infinite staircase, I mean, how do we bring meaning and business together? Is business just to generate profit, or does it an obligation to train and teach people in a world that's very transient?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think the idea that business is just to create profit is not only misguided, I just think it's flat ass wrong. It is not the purpose of business to create profit. It is the purpose of, from an investor's point of view, it is. An investor's view of your business is, I gave you some money. You are a financial instrument. You owe me some money back. God bless. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with that equation, but that's the investor equation. The customer, it's not the customer's equation. It's not the employee's equation. It's not the partner's equation. It's not the community that you live in equation. So, I mean, so I think the notion that business is supposed to just make money and billionaires are just money grubbing people, well, it's just not true. It's not what's going on. So I do think you talked about a higher level of integration. And if you think about the health of a business, how healthy can a business be if the customers don't care about you or your partners, you're just squeezing every nickel out of your partners, which, by the way, you can do if you're a hugely powerful company. But then what happens, and by the way, this happened in the automobile industry. It happened in retail, where you see these mega giant companies who can squeeze the supply chain, which teaches everybody in the supply chain to do no R&D because they have no money to do R&D. You've taken every nickel away from them. And so generosity, we have a phrase sometimes we use in our consulting called strategic acts of generosity. And Apple was brilliant about this. Like when Steve was running Apple and Tim Cook was his operations guy, they did a bunch of funding of manufacturing equipment for their partners in overseas because they could see it coming and they could see that they needed their help. And they had a pot full of money and the other guys did. Satya Nadella says, I'm going to take on OpenAI. I'm going to underwrite billions and billions and billions of dollars of compute time because I have the money and they don't. And we can do that. So I think just it's this notion there's business values and there's religious values or humane values or philosophy values. It's not true. There's values. Yeah. And you need to live your values and you're kind of crazy. Well, when you don't live your values, what happens is, first of all, people get it. I mean, you can see when people aren't living their values. If you want to plug into the administration recently, that would be a good example. But the point is they're not living their values. And when they're not living their values, what you learn as a human being is, okay, their call. I'm not running their life, it's their life, but I don't trust them. And I'm not going to trust them. And if no business can survive without a crucible of trust. You just can't get anything done if people don't have some level of trust with each other. And so I think that's where the EQ stuff and the philosophy stuff and the other things you were mentioning come in.
Mm-hmm. So let's kind of like bring this all together if we can. You mentioned in your recent article in LinkedIn, that AI is a means, not an end. We tend to you look back in time and the early adopters of the internet, all of a sudden, they got the market share. Now they're riding it for a long, long time. So people look at AI and say, oh, I got to be the best in AI and use it in every area and this, and then I'll be taken care of. But explain to me what you mean when you say it's a means, it's not the end.
It's interesting. So let's be fair. There's a handful of companies for whom probably AI is both the means and the end. And there's the ones who want to be a platform, kind of the way IBM was the platform for mainframes and, DEC and HP and those guys and Data General were the platform for mini computers and Microsoft and Intel were kind of the platform technologies for the internet and client server computing. So you can see that for OpenAI and Anthropic and the Gemini folks at Google and or Meta, I can't remember. Meta's got another one. I keep forgetting they are. Mm-hmm. But the point is, for them, AI is both an end and a means. But for everybody else, it's a means only. In other words, that's not your mission. Is not to be AI. Your mission is to make cars or cure patients or help students. By the way, Sal Khan's use about AI in the Khan Academy is just like a huge expression of values and it all coming together. But the point about that is, if you're on mission, then you say, well, do I need an AI or not? And it's part of the toolbox. Now it's a new tool. It's incredible. It's just like nuclear energy was, after the atom bomb. And what do you do with this stuff? So we're going to take some time, but I would encourage everybody on this podcast to say, if you are serious, if you think that this technology, if you suspect this technology can have a big impact in your world, then I would say, first of all, I start on the other side of the chasm. I try to say, if that's the case, is there one problem area or bottleneck either in my business or in my customer's business that if I applied AI to that bottleneck, I could release the trap value that it's holding back. That's, I think, every one of us who cares about our business and cares about our customers, we can start there and I think get a productive outcome.
So when you look finally then at a business organization and they're practicing their values and they are looking to upgrade technology all the time and they're looking to get out there and work through your 4 zones, if you will, what do you see the big mistake they make? Where do they just seem to get off course? That 1 degree turns into 500 miles missing the target.
I think there's a couple of places. I think, look, if you're in business, particularly if you're a publicly held company, then making the quarter, making the numbers, earnings calls, all that kind of thing, puts enormous pressure on you. And when you miss a number, there are significant consequences with your market cap or stock price or whatever. So I think the first easiest place to over-rotate is to say that commitment is sacrosanct. And the problem with that is at some point, if you're going to do anything transformational, you're going to have to miss your numbers. It's not going to go, that life doesn't go up, 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 up. There's a sine wave that's operating here, people. And so you have to be able to do this. That's, I would say, problem number one. I think another mistake I see a lot of is people think in the incubation zone, they have to be like a startup. Well, yes, in the way they operate, but no, not in the way of being like wild-eyed ambitious. Wild-eyed ambitious things should be either in universities or funded by venture capitalists, but they should not be funded by established enterprises. So the job in the incubation zone is to, we call it neutralize first. Later on, you can worry about how to differentiate. But the first thing you got to do is figure out, how would I use AI just to blunt an attack on my business by an AI-first startup? Because let me tell you, if you have a good business, some AI-first startup is going to come after it, because why wouldn't they? So therefore, you have to play defense before you can play offense. And I think most people just think of incubation zone as offense. So those are the 2 places I think people get into trouble.
Okay. And going back to that topic of implementation, what do you see the biggest cause for failure of implementation of any endeavor within an organization?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. If you're only playing forward from your own playbook and your own profit model and your own annual plan, you're just trying to push that plan onto the world. I mean, certainly the world gets kind of tired of you. So there are 2 kind of places where I think you can get the world on your side, or get more energy on your side. One of them, actually, they zone to win. We talk about Salesforce and Microsoft. That it kind of applies here, at least to the old Microsoft, not as much as the new one. But Microsoft was always a competition-oriented company, and we see a competitive technology. It would say, "Okay, that's our next hill to climb." They would race after it. They'd be a fast follower, and then they would overtake them, and they would integrate it into their portfolios or their suites, and they'd be off to the next race. And the world wanted them to do that because what they were doing was they were scaling stuff that the earlier leaders in the field got to a certain point, but then they stopped. They couldn't take it to the next level. Microsoft had this incredible gift of doing it. That's one way. I spend much more time with the second way, which is customer success. So in the customer success model, you're always saying, look, whatever level of customer success the customer's getting now, there's another step to take here, people. And if we're not taking it, we're letting ourselves down. We're also letting them down. And we're letting our partners down, and our supply chain down, and our communities down. So I think this notion of saying, look, who am I in service to? And back to your original point, being in service to your investors is a losing game. Honoring your investors is mandatory. You cannot blow off your investors. But being in service to your investors is a mistake, because that's not who you're in service.
Okay. Geoffrey, this has been an invaluable interesting, phenomenal conversation. What do you see for yourself in the future? Where do you see your life going?
Well, I'm playing in the fourth quarter, so let's put it this way: we're halftime is great, third quarter, but there's still time on the clock. I don't feel like we're not close to overtime or 2-minute warning or anything like that. But we're playing the fourth quarter, and I kind of have that sort of athlete thing about I'd like to leave it all out in the field. People say, well, why haven't you retired? And it's like, man, the whole word retired kind of gives me the willies. Now, can you reallocate your time in more productive ways? Heck, there's a lot of work I can do there so that I can stop doing stuff that frankly is not that productive and spend more time on things that maybe are a little more challenging, but could have a bigger impact. And I think legacy and impact are two words that have become pretty important to me. And I have to say also the circles get a little bit more condensed. So I care a lot more about my behavior as a spouse and my role in our family, the two of us are living. And then I care about my children and my grandchildren. And that's a lot. I mean, because it's easy when you're doing all the other stuff to kind of just, be nice, care, but frankly, not go the extra mile. So I need to get more of myself in the extra mile in the places where I think it's important to be. But other than that, it's just, I'm still going to write. I'm still going to blah, 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 talk. I'm still going to consult or advise. Because the nice thing about mediums like this is, I don't have to move. This is intergalactic headquarters right here. Right. So it's a incredible gift. And so I enjoy it.
Well, you have made a tremendous contribution to business thinking. And I would also say ethics, morality, and everything else that brings that picture together. And I personally, in my own life, want to thank you for doing that. If somebody wants to talk to you, what's the best way to contact you?
I think the best way is to go to LinkedIn and just say maybe you listened to the podcast and I'd like to be able to continue to connect. And I think LinkedIn is the easiest place for me to connect with.
Okay. Well, Geoffrey, I want to thank you very much for your time. It's been very valuable and meaningful, and you are certainly an icon. So I will treasure our conversation for a long time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you. Take care.
Hi, Ted Wolf here. I want to thank you for joining us for this Implementors video. The Implementors podcast is presented by Guidewise, where we, along with our vetted member community, recognize that ideas are easy, but implementation is hard. To learn more about getting things done with Guidewise, please visit us at guidewise.io. And to conquer your implementation struggles, please like and share this video and subscribe to our channel. Happy implementing.